Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the coffee pot, her knuckles white against the ceramic handle. Derek Lawson stood blocking the doorway of Rosa's kitchen, his bloodshot eyes scanning the room until they found her. The familiar cold dread crept up her spine, the same feeling that had haunted her for 6 years since he went to prison, the feeling she thought she had buried forever. Well, Derek's voice cut through the morning chatter, causing several customers to look up from their breakfast plates. Look who's here! Elena took one step backward, her heart hammering against her ribs as if it might explode. She could smell the alcohol on his breath from across the room, could see the crazed look in his eyes that she knew too well, the same look he had before every beating. The other waitresses had gone silent. Rosa stood frozen behind the counter, the small diner drowning in tension as thick as toxic smoke. Thought you could hide, Elena? Derek sneered, taking one step forward, then another. 6 years. 6 years I rotted in prison while you ran off with my kid. Now I'm back. We need to talk about Lily. About what you owe me. That's when she felt it. A presence behind her, solid and commanding, the faint scent of sandalwood replacing the disgusting smell of alcohol. A man's voice, low and deadly calm, spoke just over her shoulder. I think the lady made it clear she's not interested in talking. In that suffocating moment, just before everything continued to unfold. If you are listening to this story, take a single heartbeat to subscribe to the channel, to like and to share, so we can bring you many more tender, emotional stories each day, because those small gestures are what keep the flame of storytelling alive. And if you are anywhere in the world right now, leave a comment below and tell us where you are listening from. Whether it is Chicago, California, Texas, or a small town tucked somewhere inside a cold night, because we long to know the place where this story has found you and touched your heart across the wide map of the world. Derek whipped around, his bloodshot eyes narrowing the instant he saw the man who had spoken. A man nearly a full head taller than him, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his dark hair slicked back, and his cold gray eyes fixed on Derek without a single blink. Eyes that held no fear, only the steady composure of someone long accustomed to facing dangers 100 times greater than Derek would ever be. And when Derek growled that this was none of his business, his voice already lacked the ferocity it held moments before, because the survival instincts he had honed in prison were screaming that this man was not someone to intimidate. But the stranger answered in a low, unhurried voice that he had just made it his business, then stepped beside Elena, positioning himself between her and Derek like a wall. And Elena felt his hand touch her back, gentle yet firm, as if assuring her that everything would be all right. And when Derek demanded whether he knew who he was, the man replied that he did not care who Derek was, that what mattered was that Derek was bothering a woman who did not want to speak to him and disturbing his breakfast, and a tense silence swept through the diner, while a few customers quietly left money on their tables and slipped out, unwilling to be caught in whatever this might become. And Rosa stood behind the counter with one hand reaching beneath it where she kept the baseball bat for moments like these. And Derek licked his lips, glancing between Elena and the stranger, recognizing something in the man's stance and the absolute, effortless confidence radiating from him, understanding that this was not some neighborhood hero trying to show off, but someone genuinely dangerous, the kind of danger even men in prison knew to avoid. So he smirked, stepped back, and said he would leave, though he pointed at Elena with venom and swore the matter was not over, that the child was his, that the law was on his side, and warned the stranger to be careful not to meddle in matters that were none of his concern. But the man did not answer, only watched Derek retreat until the door closed behind him, and his shadow disappeared through the glass. And only then did Elena realize she had been holding her breath the entire time, her knees giving out so that the coffee pot nearly slipped from her hand. And Rosa rushed to steady her and place her into the nearest chair, asking if she was all right because her face had drained of color. But Elena could not respond. Her throat felt crushed. 6 long years during which she had built a new life, years spent learning not to flinch at the sound of a door opening, years trying to forget bruises and broken bones, and within mere minutes it all had collapsed. And the stranger's voice rose again, saying she needed water, and perhaps a moment to rest. And he knelt before her now, with gray eyes softened, no longer cold as they had been when confronting Derek, and Elena whispered her thanks, trembling, saying she did not know what would have happened if he had not. But he cut her off gently, telling her not to thank him, that he had only done what any decent person would do. Then he stood and pulled a small black card from the inside of his suit jacket, a card with no name or title, only a string of numbers printed in silver ink, placing it on the table before her and telling her that if Derek returned or if she needed anything at any time, she should call that number. And Elena stared at the card, then up at him, wanting to ask who he was and why he was helping her, why he cared. But before she could speak, he placed several bills beside his cooling breakfast and walked out, the tiny bell above the door chiming softly before he vanished into the stream of people on the street, as though he had never been there. And Elena picked up the card with trembling fingers, tracing the printed numbers, not knowing who he was or why he had appeared or why he had stepped between her and Derek. Yet something in his eyes and in the way he had stood shielding her made her feel something she had forgotten long ago, the feeling of safety, and Rosa murmured that she should keep the card because something in her bones told her Elena would need it. 4 hours before Derek Lawson stepped through the doors of Rosa's kitchen and shattered every illusion of peace she had, Elena Mitchell had awakened in darkness, the clock on the wall pointing to 3:30 in the morning, though she did not need to look because she always rose at this hour, the hour her body had been trained to meet for 6 years, early enough to prepare for her office cleaning shift before sunrise, early enough to check whether Lily was still breathing evenly in her sleep, and Elena lay on the thin mattress spread on the floor, her back aching from the frozen concrete beneath it, because the studio apartment had only one narrow bed, and she had given it to Lily the day they moved in, knowing her daughter needed one soft place to rest in a life that held so few comforts, while Elena herself had long grown used to discomfort, and she sat up with her breath turning into pale vapor in the icy air since the heater had broken 2 weeks earlier, and the landlord had promised to fix it but never came, and Elena dared not call again, because the woman had threatened to raise the rent if she complained once more. And Boston winters were merciless, and this apartment was little more than a refrigerator with cracked walls that let the wind slip through, and Elena wrapped another thin blanket around her shoulders and stood silently so as not to wake Lily, stepping to the bedside to look at her daughter, curled beneath 2 layers of blankets Elena had tucked around her. Lily, at 6 years old, with lightly curled brown hair like her mother's, yet with eyes that resembled her father's, eyes that made Elena ache with memory and gratitude all at once, for they reminded her of everything Derek had done to her and of the one good thing that had emerged from those 4 years of hell. And she sat at the edge of the bed stroking her daughter's hair, while Lily murmured in her sleep, perhaps dreaming of something far lovelier than the shabby apartment, or the meals made of instant noodles and discounted frozen vegetables, and Elena prayed her daughter's dreams would always stay warm and bright because reality had already taken too much, and the streetlight's glow slipped through the torn curtain, painting faint streaks on the peeling walls of the 5th-floor apartment in an old South Boston building, where police sirens formed the nightly soundtrack, a place she had chosen not because she wanted it but because it was the only place that would accept a single mother with no credit history, no guarantor, nothing but 2 empty hands and a screaming 2-year-old. And 6 years earlier, when Derek had been sentenced for drug trafficking, Elena believed it was the day she was finally free, and she fled that house of nightmares with only 1 bag and $300 hidden inside her shoe, too afraid to take anything more, fearful that Derek would somehow know, or that his associates would reach her before the prison gates shut behind him, and she ran toward a new city, a new life, a new name. And now she looked around the apartment she had called home for 6 years, the sink in the kitchen corner dripping steadily like a countdown, the mini fridge humming in strange tones, as though about to die, the table buried under unpaid bills, beside the notice of hospital debt from when Lily battled severe pneumonia 6 months earlier, $12,000 owed, a mountain for a woman working 2 jobs and still barely surviving, and Elena closed her eyes to keep the tears from falling, tears she had already shed too many times, too exhausted to spill more, and all she could do now was move forward 1 day at a time, 1 hour at a time, for Lily, for the child who bore none of the blame for any of this. Yet tonight, in the biting cold of the unheated apartment, Elena allowed herself to remember the 16-year-old girl standing at her parents' graves drenched in rain without a single tear, to remember Uncle Greg's house where she had thought she would find refuge but instead found the beginning of her torment, and to remember the way Derek's eyes had once looked at her, warm and gentle before everything turned into an endless nightmare. Elena was 16 years old when the world collapsed for the first time, when her parents died in a car accident on Interstate 90 after a truck lost control and slammed into them during a stormy night, and the police said they died instantly without pain, as if such words could comfort a 16-year-old girl who had just lost everything, and she remembered standing beside their coffins in a borrowed black dress, because she did not have money to buy mourning clothes and wondering why she could not cry, perhaps because her tears had frozen the moment the officer knocked on the door at 2 a.m, perhaps because she had died with her parents without realizing it, and Uncle Greg, her father's younger brother and the only family she had left, took her in with the expression of a man who had just won the lottery, not out of love but because of the $200,000 in life insurance her parents had left behind, money Elena knew nothing about until much later, when she discovered Uncle Greg had burned through all of it in 2 years of gambling and drinking. And in his house, she was not a niece but an unpaid servant, a punching bag whenever he lost money, a ghost not allowed to sit at the table, while Aunt Linda was even worse, looking at Elena as if she were a cockroach that had crawled into the house and tormenting her with spiteful remarks and endless chores. And those 2 years stretched like 2 centuries, as Elena endured everything, because she had no choice, because she was not yet 18, because she had no one in the world except the people hurting her, until the night she turned 18 when Uncle Greg drunkenly stumbled into her room with eyes she never wanted to remember, and she ran, climbing out the window with a backpack containing a few clothes and $80 in tips she had saved from washing dishes part-time at a restaurant near school, sleeping that night at a bus station and the nights after in shelters and churches and anywhere that would let her lie down without being chased away. And then Derek appeared, 24 years old, handsome, polished, driving a shiny car, and speaking sweet words Elena had never heard before, telling her she was beautiful, telling her she deserved love, telling her he would take care of her forever, and the 18-year-old girl with no family, no home, no one who cared whether she lived or died, believed every word. And the first 6 months felt like a dream, as Derek bought her pretty clothes, took her to elegant restaurants, introduced her to his friends as if she were a treasure, and Elena thought she had finally found her place, thought happiness had finally touched her, until the dream ended the night she asked Derek what he did for work, and the first slap came so fast she did not have time to move, and he told her she had no right to ask, told her she should know her place, told her that without him she was nothing but a street girl. And from that night the nightmare began. A nightmare she could not count in bruises because there were too many, as Derek beat her when drunk, beat her when sober, beat her when he was happy, beat her when he was angry, his addiction to drugs growing heavier until every high turned into another punishment for her, and she suffered broken ribs and bruises so dark she hid inside for days, and once he dragged her across the floor by her hair for daring to look at another man, and then she became pregnant, and Derek forbade her to end the pregnancy, saying the baby would tie her to him forever, and that if she dared run, he would find her and kill them both, and Elena believed he would. So Lily was born in a cheap hospital, and Elena looked at her newborn daughter for the first time with a shattered heart, loving her without condition, yet hating herself for bringing her into this world. And 2 months later, the police raided the house and arrested Derek for drug trafficking, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but had it reduced to 6 for good behavior. And 6 years passed with Elena raising Lily alone, working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating whatever Lily left on her plate, rebuilding her life from ashes and teaching herself to believe she could survive without anyone. And those 4 years ended this morning when Derek Lawson walked into Rose's kitchen. Elena pushed those memories aside when the alarm rang at 5 in the morning, for she had not fallen back asleep after waking at 3:30, only lay in the dark, letting her mind drift into the past. Yet now was not the time for reflection, because she needed to begin another day like every other day of the past 6 years. And she stood, folded the thin mattress and blanket into the corner, and started breakfast, finding the fridge nearly empty with only a few eggs, some milk, and slices of bread about to expire. So she fried eggs for Lily and drank only black coffee herself, her body long accustomed to skipping breakfast, her stomach so tightened by years of hunger, it scarcely recognized the sensation anymore. And at 6 she woke Lily, who stirred in the blankets with sleepy brown eyes, and Elena whispered for her to get up for school while stroking her hair. And the little girl, already familiar with cold mornings and thrift store clothes, did not complain, which hurt Elena more than any words could. And on the way to school, Lily held her mother's hand as their breath turned into pale clouds in the freezing Boston air, until she looked up and asked where her father was, and Elena felt her heart seize even though she had rehearsed her answer 100 times, telling her gently that her father had gone far away, as she always said. But Lily mentioned how Emma was picked up by her father every day, and Tommy too, and wondered why she did not have a father to pick her up, and Elena knelt to hold her tiny cold hands and told her she had her mother, that her mother would always pick her up, always be there. And Lily studied her for a moment, then nodded, asking nothing more as though sensing this was a forbidden territory, and Elena kissed her forehead and walked on, never telling her that her father was an abuser, a trafficker, a monster wearing human skin, wanting to protect her daughter from the truth for as long as possible, though she knew the day would come. And after dropping Lily at school, Elena walked to Rose's kitchen, tucked between a laundromat and a long-closed shoe repair shop in South Boston. Not a fancy place, but the only one that had given her a chance when no one else would. And Rosa Delgado, the 62-year-old owner with silver hair and hands hardened by a lifetime of cooking, had seen Elena standing at the door 6 years earlier holding her crying infant with bruises still visible on her face and asked nothing. Simply opened the door and told her to come in and asked if she knew how to carry plates, and now Rosa greeted her with a weary smile when she walked in, asking if she had slept badly. And Elena answered as she always did while tying her apron, seeing a few regulars already scattered across the diner, the construction workers with their morning coffee, the elderly woman sipping tea by the window, and in the corner booth sat the man Elena had noticed all week, sitting alone in his perfectly tailored black suit, far too refined for a humble diner like this, his dark hair slicked back, his angular face bent over his cup of coffee, the watch on his wrist glinting beneath the lights, and likely worth more than Elena's yearly rent. And Rosa lowered her voice as Elena passed the counter, saying he was here again, that he had come every day all week sitting in the same place ordering the same thing, and Elena remarked that perhaps he liked the coffee. But Rosa snorted and said her coffee was good, yet men dressed like that did not come here for coffee. They came for something else, and she had a feeling that something had to do with Elena. Elena shook her head at Rosa's remark, though she could not deny the older woman was right. Because she too had noticed the man, not because he was handsome or wealthy, but because there was something about him she could not look away from. Perhaps the way he sat with his back straight, yet never rigid like someone accustomed to observing everything around him without ever needing to turn his head, or perhaps those gray eyes that were cold without being empty, as though hiding an entire world beneath the surface. And when Rosa handed her the coffee pot and told her to refill his cup since Sarah was out sick and only the two of them were working that morning, Elena nodded and walked toward the corner booth, her heartbeat rising for reasons she did not understand, for she had served thousands of customers over the past 6 years, good ones and bad ones, polite ones and crude ones, yet none had ever made her feel as though she were stepping into the territory of a sleeping predator pretending to rest. And when she reached the table and asked whether he would like more coffee in her practiced professional tone, the man lifted his head, and Elena met his eyes fully for the first time, discovering they were deeper than she had imagined, like frozen lakes concealing something beneath, and he studied her not with the leering interest of men who flirt with waitresses, but with the focused attention of someone reading a book and trying to understand every sentence. And when he answered yes please in a voice low and smooth as velvet and pushed his cup toward her, the movement lifted his sleeve just enough for her to glimpse a tattoo on his wrist, a black ink serpent coiled around a sword with intricate detailing. And though she did not know its meaning, her instincts told her it was not the tattoo of an ordinary businessman, and she poured the coffee while trying to steady her hands. And then he asked how long she had worked there, surprising her, and she answered 6 years, and he repeated the words softly as if committing them to memory before asking whether she liked the job, and she said it paid the bills, then quickly corrected herself, saying Rosa treated her well and it was a good place to work, and he nodded while glancing at the counter where Rosa was polishing a glass, remarking that she seemed like a good person, and Elena said she was the best person she had ever met, because without Rosa she had no idea what would have become of her and Lily, and the man fell silent for a moment, tapping his finger lightly against the cup, while the gold signet ring on his pinky glinted under the lights with an engraved symbol Elena did not recognize. And then he said she had a child, not as a question but as a statement, making Elena stiffen until he pointed to the faint traces of colored powder on her sleeve, the kind children used when they drew, and added that she had looked at the clock 3 times in 5 minutes, as if calculating when she needed to pick someone up, and Elena saw the blue smudge of paint Lily had left on her the night before, and felt a shiver at the precision of his observation, unsure whether to be impressed or alarmed. And she simply said her daughter was 6, and he stated again, not asking, that she was raising her alone, and that it was not easy. And Elena said nothing, unwilling to share her life with a stranger whose eyes made her want to tell everything she had ever hidden, and as though reading her mind he said he meant no intrusion, that he simply had a habit of noticing things because his work required it, and when she impulsively asked what he did and immediately regretted the question, he smiled a smile that never reached his eyes and said he solved problems for people who had problems that needed solving. And before she could ask more, the bell above the door rang, and new customers arrived, and she stepped away, filled with questions about the strange man. And when she returned to the counter, Rosa pulled her aside, asking why she had talked to him so long, and warning her again to be careful because she had lived long enough to recognize certain types of men and this one was dangerous, and Elena wanted to ask what she meant. But the bell chimed again, and 3 men walked into the diner, not looking like ordinary customers at all, all dressed in black suits with stiff postures and eyes sweeping the room as though scanning for threats. The largest man in front with a scarred face and a buzzed head, the other two behind him like bodyguards with folded arms and clenched jaws. And they did not look at anyone in the diner, not at Rosa nor at Elena, because their eyes were fixed on a single point, the man in the corner booth. And Elena froze behind the counter, still holding her dish towel as she watched them approach him, and what she saw next made her blood run cold when the scarred man stopped before the booth and bowed his head respectfully and addressed him as "Boss," saying there was a problem with the shipment at the port and they needed his decision. And the man who had moments before been speaking to Elena in a gentle tone transformed instantly into someone entirely different, lifting his head with gray eyes that were no longer warm or veiled but frozen and razor-sharp and full of suffocating authority, his entire presence shifting in a heartbeat from refined gentleman to a figure one instinctively backed away from. And he asked what the problem was, in a voice no longer velvet but hard as a blade, and the scarred man leaned in to whisper something Elena could not hear. Yet she saw the reaction clearly, the tightening of his jaw and the slow, dangerous tapping of his finger on the table. And then he said to deal with it in a tone that never rose but carried so much authority that all three large men bowed their heads. And he added that he wanted to know who was responsible before noon, and that they should ensure the person understood the consequences of disappointing him, and the scarred man answered, "Yes, boss," and gestured for the others to follow, leaving as swiftly as they had entered while the bell chimed faintly behind them, and Elena realized she had been holding her breath again, and struggled to steady herself while her heart hammered wildly, and the word boss echoed in her mind, because they had not addressed him as the owner of a company, or the director of a legal enterprise, but with the same fear-laced reverence she had heard among the low-level drug traffickers Derek once worked with, only this man was clearly not a pawn but the one commanding the entire board. And Rosa had been right. He was dangerous. Dangerous in a way Elena should stay far away from, and yet when the man stood and adjusted his collar, the terrifying coldness vanished as if it had never been there. And he approached the counter while Elena forced herself not to step back. And he apologized for the interruption in the same soft tone he had used earlier, saying it was work, then set down a $100 bill worth far more than the cost of his breakfast, and took from the inside pocket of his suit jacket a small black card which he placed beneath the money, and Elena felt her heart pound as she saw it, identical to the card he would leave her in the future after saving her from Derek, though she did not know that yet, and all she saw was a black card with a string of silver-printed numbers, and no name, no title, nothing at all, and he told her it was for when she needed it at any time, then walked out, leaving Elena standing with her racing heartbeat and a card she did not know whether to keep. And Rosa stepped beside her, watching his figure disappear through the glass, and whispered that she had warned her, that he was dangerous, yet he seemed to care for her, and sometimes the most dangerous men were the best protectors. But the question Elena needed to ask herself was whether she was willing to pay the price. That night, after Derek appeared, and the mysterious man intervened, Elena could not concentrate on her work, spilling coffee twice, forgetting customers' orders 3 times, until Rosa urged her to go home early with a worried voice, telling her she was in no condition to work and should pick up Lily and rest. And although Elena wanted to refuse because every hour of work meant money for the bills, she knew Rosa was right, for her mind was not in the diner but trapped somewhere between the terror of seeing Derek and the confusion of thinking about the man who had left her the black card, and she left the diner at 5 in the afternoon, 2 hours earlier than usual, the card still in her apron pocket until she moved it into her wallet before walking out, unsure why she kept it. Perhaps because Rosa had said that sometimes the most dangerous men were the best protectors, perhaps because those gray eyes had looked at her as if she were someone worth protecting, and she reached the school later than usual because she walked instead of taking the bus to save money, finding Lily waiting at the gate with her teacher looking sad, and when the girl asked why she was late, Elena apologized softly while hugging her, thanking the teacher before leading her daughter away with a weight of guilt tightening in her chest because she had promised never to let Lily wait, but life had crushed that promise like every other one she had ever tried to keep, and the sky was already dimming as they walked home since winter in Boston grew dark quickly, and the streets of South Boston felt even darker, with broken streetlights no one bothered to repair. So Elena gripped Lily's hand tightly while hurrying past familiar alleys until she saw it parked right in front of her building, the old black Mustang with the dented front bumper, the one she would recognize anywhere, even in complete darkness. Derek's car, and her heart seemed to stop as she froze in the middle of the street staring at it while holding Lily's hand so tightly the girl whimpered in pain, but Elena could not respond, only scanned the shadows in panic, imagining Derek everywhere, in the car, behind a tree, in the alley, or worse, already inside the building waiting for her in the dark hallway, and she whispered for Lily to hurry, voice trembling as she lifted her daughter and ran toward the back entrance of the building, Lily clinging to her neck, sensing her mother's fear without understanding it. And they climbed 5 flights of stairs with Elena gasping for air, her legs threatening to give out, before unlocking the apartment with shaking hands and pushing Lily inside, slamming the door and locking all 3 locks before dragging a chair to brace it. Even though she knew nothing would stop Derek if he wanted to force his way in, and Lily asked why she was so scared while Elena kept the lights off so he would not see any glow from the street, telling her they were playing hide and seek and to get into bed while she kept watch, and the girl obeyed without question, curling under the blankets as she did whenever frightened, while Elena sat against the door clutching a pillow and staring at the thin strip of darkness beneath the frame, afraid to sleep or blink or breathe too loudly, jumping at every noise from the hallway, footsteps, the elevator, neighbors talking, each sound becoming Derek's shadow creeping closer, until at 2 a.m. her phone vibrated with an unknown number, and she answered with trembling hands, unable not to. And Derek's slow, threatening voice slithered through the line, calling her by name, asking if she thought she could hide, listing her apartment number, the intersection her building stood on, the school Lily attended, the teacher's name, and Elena felt her breath snap as tears streamed down her face while she whispered, asking what he wanted. And he said he wanted what belonged to him, that the child was his, that she was his wife, that he would take everything back, and if she ran or called the police, he would make her regret being born. Then he hung up, leaving Elena in the darkness, with the phone slipping from her hand as she cried in silence, so as not to wake Lily or let Derek hear her from wherever he lurked, and 4 years of running and rebuilding collapsed in a single day. For the next 3 days after the threatening call, Elena lived in constant fear, unable to sleep or eat, her eyes always searching for Derek's silhouette, checking every parked car and every man walking by when she took Lily to school, sprinting home each evening as if something were chasing her. And Rosa noticed the change and asked, but Elena claimed she was tired because she did not want to drag the woman into this chaos after everything she had already done. And on the 3rd afternoon, while Elena was wiping down tables, her phone rang, the school's number flashing on the screen, and dread seized her as she answered to hear Miss Matthews explaining with tense urgency that a man had come claiming to be Lily's father, demanding to take her, becoming aggressive at the gate, and though they had refused because his name was not on the approved list, he was causing a scene, and Elena froze, asking if Lily was safe, and the teacher said she was. Shaken, but in the office, and Elena ran before hearing the rest, dropping the cloth, throwing her apron aside, ignoring Rosa, calling after her as she sprinted through the streets, cutting the usual 15-minute route to 8, and when she arrived, she found a small crowd gathered as 2 security guards struggled to restrain Derek, who was shouting that he had the right to see his daughter, his face red with fury and likely alcohol, and Elena slipped past him without looking, ignoring the curses he hurled at her, rushing into the office where Lily sat curled in a chair with a pale face and tear-streaked cheeks, and the girl launched herself into Elena's arms, sobbing that a man had claimed to be her father, and yelled and pounded on the door, and she had been so scared, and Elena held her close, swallowing her own tears because she could not break in front of her child, whispering that it was all right and she was here and she would never let anyone frighten her again. And Miss Matthews approached, asking if they should call the police because the man was dangerous, and Elena wanted to say yes, but she knew the police could not help, not when Derek had legal grounds to sue for visitation, and not when they could not protect her around the clock, and by the time they arrived it might be too late. So she said she would handle it herself and carried Lily out through the back door, taking a long detour home while constantly looking over her shoulder, her heart pounding, and that night when Lily slept, Elena sat in the dark and pulled the black card from her wallet, staring at the silver numbers as her trembling finger traced the smooth surface, aware of who the man was, or at least aware of the danger surrounding him, because men who were called boss by scarred giants were never good men. Yet Derek was dangerous too, and between 2 dangers she had to choose one. So she lifted the phone and dialed, her heart thundering as the line rang once, twice, then clicked, and the familiar low voice answered, saying he had been waiting for her call, as though he had known she would reach out, and asked what she needed. Elena remained silent for a moment, unsure where to begin, all the words she had rehearsed in her mind 100 times, dissolving the instant she heard his voice, and when she asked how he knew she would call, her voice hoarse, Dominic replied with calm certainty, as though they were discussing the weather, that he knew she was in trouble and had few choices, then asked who the man at the diner had been, and Elena swallowed hard before saying he was the father of her daughter, her former lover, recently released from prison after 4 years, determined to take the child back and unwilling to stop until he got what he wanted. And Dominic stated, not questioned, that the man had threatened her, that he knew her home address and the school her daughter attended, and that he had gone to the school demanding to take the little girl, leaving the 6-year-old so terrified she could not sleep, and hearing herself speak with a trembling voice and tears pressing to fall. Elena hated her weakness and hated having to beg help from a stranger, but there was nothing else she could do, and silence stretched on the other end before Dominic spoke again with a sharper, colder tone, as though her story had touched a nerve within him, saying the man had abused her, that he had beaten her before prison, and though she gave no answer, her silence confirmed it. And Dominic told her to meet him the next morning at 7 at Rose's kitchen so they could talk and he could see what might be done. And when she asked what he could possibly do, or why he wanted to help when he knew nothing about her or her circumstances, he answered simply that he helped because he could and because no one deserved to live in fear, especially a mother trying to protect her child. Then he hung up, leaving Elena in the darkness with countless questions and no answers, and she set down the phone and looked toward the bed where Lily slept, curled beneath the blankets, with her small face drawn tight as if trapped in a nightmare. And Elena longed to gather her daughter into her arms and promise everything would be all right, though she no longer knew whether she could keep such a promise, wondering what she was doing, seeking help from one dangerous man to escape another, questioning whether this was truly different from leaping from a tiger's mouth into a wolf's, for Dominic was the boss of men whose very presence made others tremble, speaking of shipments and consequences as though human lives were weights on a scale, dangerous in ways Derek could never reach. Yet Derek was out there lurking and waiting with a determination she felt in her bones, and she knew he would take Lily and kill her if she tried to stop him, for he had nearly killed her before and only fate had prevented him from finishing, leaving her with nothing else to lose except her daughter, the one remaining thing in her life worth saving. And in the darkness, Elena let her tears fall freely, knowing she had lost her parents, her childhood, her innocence, and her trust in others, and that Lily was all she had left and she would do anything to protect her, even strike a bargain with the devil. So in the morning she would meet Dominic and hear what he offered and accept whatever price was required if that was the only way to keep Lily safe. The next morning she arrived at Rose's kitchen at 6:45, 15 minutes early, unable to sleep the entire night, not from fear of Derek but from dread and uncertainty about what this meeting would demand of her, not knowing what she was stepping into or what Dominic might expect in return for his help, for nothing in this world came free. And Rosa opened the door with worry in her eyes, asking if she was sure about this, because she did not trust that man, and Elena answered that she had no other choice because Derek would not stop, and she could not let him take Lily. And Rosa squeezed her hand, telling her that no matter what happened she would always be there, and that if things went wrong Elena must run to the diner. And Elena nodded with stinging eyes, wishing she could collapse into Rosa's arms, as she had done 4 years earlier when she arrived, bruised and terrified. But there was no time for that, and at exactly 7, the door opened and Dominic stepped inside wearing a black shirt with no jacket, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and the serpent and sword tattoo she had glimpsed before, his gray eyes sweeping the diner before settling on her, giving a brief nod before walking to his familiar corner booth. And Elena brought 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him for the first time instead of standing to serve him, and he told her to start from the beginning with a voice gentle yet lined with authority. So Elena told him everything, speaking of her parents' deaths when she was 16, of Uncle Greg and the 2 years of hell in his house, of the night she escaped and the refuge she found in shelters and bus stations, of Derek and his sweet words turned violent hands, of the endless beatings, the pregnancy, the years of raising Lily alone in poverty after he went to prison, and finally of the recent days with the threatening call and Derek's appearance at school. And Dominic listened without interrupting, his gray eyes fixed on her face with no pity, no judgment, none of the empty phrases people use to mask discomfort, only attention and a quiet respect that comforted her more deeply than sympathy could. And when she finished, he sat in silence for a moment, sipping his coffee with a gaze that had grown darker, calculating, before saying he had already had someone look into Derek after the incident at the diner, learning that Derek had worked for a small gang in Dorchester before prison, involved in drugs and violence and released early for good behavior, though his nature was unchanged, which did not surprise her. And when she asked what he could do, he answered with icy calm that he could make Derek disappear forever, or make him understand that approaching her or her child would be something he regretted for the rest of his life. And Elena shivered at the meaning behind those words, and whispered that she did not want anyone to die because of her, that she only wanted Lily safe, and Dominic studied her before nodding and telling her to come live with him, she and the child, in his penthouse in Back Bay, with 24-hour security where no one could come near without his permission, assuring her that Derek would never reach her there, and Elena stared in shock, saying she could not live with him. But Dominic cut her off, clarifying that this was not a romantic proposal but a practical solution because her apartment, her neighborhood, and her current life were not safe, and he was offering protection, nothing more. And when she demanded to know what he wanted in return, saying there were no free meals in the world, he met her eyes, and for a fleeting moment she saw something pained in the cold gray depths before he said he wanted nothing, that she could consider it a debt he owed the universe, that there were things he had failed to protect in his past, and perhaps protecting her and her daughter might let him sleep a little easier. And though Elena did not understand his meaning, she sensed the sincerity in his voice and stared down at her coffee while her mind twisted itself into knots, wondering whether moving in with a man she barely knew, a man she knew was dangerous, could possibly be the right choice. Elena left the diner without giving an answer, telling Dominic she needed time to think, and he did not press her, simply nodding and saying she had his number and could call at any time. And she picked up Lily from school, made a simple dinner of instant noodles and eggs, then read her a bedtime story, everything unfolding as it always did. Yet inside Elena, a storm raged endlessly as she weighed the possibility of taking her daughter to live in the home of a Mafia boss. And the strangest part was that she was leaning toward agreeing, and at 11 that night she still could not sleep. Sitting on the floor beside Lily's bed watching her daughter breathe, as she wondered where in her life everything had gone wrong, whether it had begun when her parents died, or when she trusted Uncle Greg, or when she loved Derek, or perhaps from the moment she was born into a world that seemed to have no place for people like her. And then the pounding at the door shattered the silence. Not polite knocking, but fists and kicks, and the violent noise of a man losing control as Derek screamed her name through the hallway, drunk and seething with hatred, shouting that she could not hide, and that the man from the diner could not protect her, that he would kill him and kill them both. And Lily jolted awake in terror, asking who it was. But Elena had no time to answer, scooping her daughter into her arms and running into the bathroom, the only room with a strong enough lock, shutting the door and turning the bolt, before sighting on the freezing floor with Lily in her lap, while the pounding grew louder, wood cracking, metal groaning, her 3 locks ready to give way, knowing that when Derek was drunk he did not stop, and he would break down the door and find them, and this time he would not simply threaten. And Lily sobbed into her chest, asking who the man was and what he wanted, while Elena whispered for her to hush and promised she would protect her, even as her own voice trembled, and she pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed the only number that came to mind in this moment of panic. And Dominic answered after the first ring, as though waiting, and when she told him Derek was there pounding on the door, drunk and unhinged, and she did not know what to do, he cut her off in a voice cold as steel, asking for the address, and she confirmed apartment 52 on the 5th floor at the corner of 3rd Street and D Street, and he said 15 minutes, and told her not to open the door for anyone until she heard his voice, then hung up, and those 15 minutes stretched like 15 years. As Elena sat in the dark bathroom holding Lily close while Derek screamed, threatened to kill them, threatened to burn down the building, spewing every vile thing a human could conjure, and no neighbor intervened because in this part of the city everyone knew to mind their own business if they wanted to stay alive. And then suddenly the pounding stopped, leaving only Elena's ragged breath in the darkness, and she heard voices, Derek's shrill and panicked, then footsteps, the sound of someone being dragged, a groan of pain, and then silence, followed by a soft knock, and Dominic's voice calling gently for her, and Elena set Lily down and told her to stay put as she opened the bathroom door to find the apartment intact, the front door open, and Dominic standing there with 2 large men behind him while Derek was nowhere in sight. And when she asked where he was, Dominic said he was being escorted away and would not trouble her tonight or any other night, and Elena did not ask what escorted meant, not wanting to know, only knowing that minutes earlier she had been in a bathroom clutching her daughter and unable to breathe from fear, and now she stood before the man who had saved her for the 2nd time in a week, and Lily stepped out looking at Dominic with tearful eyes asking who he was, and he knelt to meet her gaze, his voice so gentle Elena barely recognized it, telling her he was a friend of her mother's and had come to make sure they were safe, and Lily studied him before nodding and thanking him, and Elena saw this, and in that moment the decision formed in her soul, no longer wavering, and she said they would go with him that night, immediately, and soon the black car glided through the Boston streets at midnight, with Elena in the back seat holding the exhausted Lily who slept curled against her after the terror, and she watched the familiar buildings of South Boston fall away, replaced by wealthier neighborhoods with gleaming lights, moving from the world of broken streetlights and cramped apartments to the world of towering glass buildings and polished streets. And Dominic sat in the front, speaking quietly to the driver in a voice too low for her to catch, glancing into the rearview mirror now and then as if checking that she and Lily were all right. And Elena did not know what to think of this man, a mafia boss whom grown men called boss with fear in their voices, yet also a man who knelt to comfort her daughter and arrived in 15 minutes to help her, and offered protection without demanding anything in return. Two images that did not fit together and left her unsure which was the real one. And when the car stopped before a high-rise in Back Bay, the wealthiest part of Boston, Elena stared in disbelief because she had walked past these buildings many times with admiration and distance, never imagining she would ever step inside, much less live in one. And Dominic opened the door for her and gently lifted the half-asleep Lily into his arms, the child instinctively curling into his chest, as though recognizing safety. And Elena felt something twist inside her she could not yet name. And they walked through a marble lobby beneath a crystal chandelier, while the security guards bowed respectfully to Dominic, and the private elevator carried them to the 40th floor, where a single penthouse occupied the entire level. And when the doors opened, Lily woke fully, rubbing her eyes before gasping in awe as she took in the vast penthouse with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed Boston sparkling beneath the night sky, the polished wood floors and minimalist but lavish furnishings gleaming softly in the dim lights. And Elena realized her entire apartment could fit into one corner of this living room, and Lily whispered, asking her mother if this was a castle, and Elena could not answer because she herself felt overwhelmed. And Dominic told Lily gently it was not a castle, only his home, and now also hers and her mother's, and he set her down before leading them through the living room and down a hallway lined with paintings Elena suspected cost more than her yearly wages, stopping before a pale pink door which he opened to reveal Lily's room. A dream poured into reality with a princess bed draped in white voile, pink bedding adorned with castles and unicorns, shelves filled with dolls and stuffed animals and puzzles, a small desk beneath the window with colored pencils and drawing paper, and star-shaped lamps casting a soft glow on fairy tale illustrations decorating the walls. And Lily asked if all of it was hers, and Dominic nodded, saying he had heard she liked princesses, and the child threw herself around his leg in an impulsive hug, her tiny face pressed into his knee, and Elena watched the scene with her heart tightening around an emotion she was not yet ready to name. Elena looked at her daughter and then at Dominic, tears gathering in her eyes, unable to remember the last time anyone had done something kind for her child, for Lily had never had many toys or a room of her own, or anything remotely luxurious. And now here she was watching a man she had met only a few times give her daughter an entire fairy tale room, as though Lily had always deserved it. And when she asked why he had done all of this, whether he had known they would come, whether he had known she would say yes, Dominic met her gaze with gray eyes that softened as he answered that he had not known but had hoped, adding that he wanted the little girl to have something joyful if they did come. And Elena found herself standing in the middle of the lavish room, watching her daughter laugh with pure delight for the first time in days, and she wondered whether she had stepped into heaven or into hell, or perhaps into a place suspended somewhere between the two. Because with a man like Dominic, the boundary between those worlds felt unbearably thin. The first days in the penthouse passed like a strange dream Elena did not dare believe was real, and Lily adapted with astonishing ease, running through the vast apartment as though it were her own private playground, while Dominic was rarely home during the day. Gone for work Elena never asked about and he never explained, yet every evening he returned, always asking after her and Lily, always sitting down to dinner with them as though it were the most natural thing in the world. And although Elena kept her distance and remained cautious, she could not deny that for the first time in years she felt safe. And on the third night after Lily had fallen asleep in her princess room, Elena wandered through the penthouse unable to rest, drifting through the living room and the hallway until she stopped before a door she had never entered, the faint golden light spilling through the gap, drawing her closer until she saw it was Dominic's study with its large wooden desk and walls lined with bookshelves. And Dominic sat inside with his back to the door, looking down at something in his hands, and Elena would have turned away had her eyes not caught the photograph on his desk of a young woman in a wheelchair, smiling gently at the camera with the same deep gray eyes as Dominic, though hers seemed warmer, softer, and Dominic's voice startled her as he asked whether she could not sleep, already turned toward her though she had not realized it, and when she apologized he told her to come in, saying he could not sleep either, and after a moment of hesitation, She stepped inside and sat across from him, her gaze still drawn to the photograph, and Dominic followed her eyes before speaking in a voice softened in a way she had never heard, saying it was his sister Nina, who was 30 this year, and when Elena said she was beautiful and asked where she lived, Dominic answered that she stayed in a specialized care facility outside the city, the best money could buy, then touched the frame with his fingertips and said she had been paralyzed since she was 10, because his father had broken her spine. And Elena drew in a sharp breath, her heart tightening because she knew domestic violence too well. Yet hearing another speak of it still hurt deeply, and Dominic continued in an even tone as though recounting someone else's story, saying he had been 12 when it happened, that Nina had spilled a glass of milk on the table. Nothing more, and their father had thrown her down the stairs. And when their mother tried to save her, he beat her too until she could no longer stand. And Dominic lifted his eyes, the gray deepening to darkness, saying his mother died in the hospital 3 days later from a brain hemorrhage, that Nina survived but never walked again, and that he had stood in the corner of the room doing nothing because he had been too small and too weak and too afraid. And Elena whispered that he had been a child and could not have done more, but Dominic nodded, saying he knew that. Yet the 12-year-old boy had sworn never to be weak again, never to let anyone hurt the people he loved, and that he had become what he was now to keep that promise, then looked at Elena with an expression both deep and wounded as he told her he was not a good man, that he had done terrible things and had blood on his hands. But everything he had done was to protect Nina and ensure she was cared for and safe and could live the rest of her life in comfort. And when Elena asked quietly about his father, he answered coldly that he was dead, that he had made sure the man never hurt anyone again. And though Elena understood what that meant, she felt no fear, because she knew that if she had that power she would have done the same to Derek to protect Lily. And she told Dominic they were more alike than he realized, both products of violence trying to protect those they loved in the only ways they knew. And Dominic looked at her for a long time, and something shifted in his gray eyes, a wall falling, a door opening, as he told her she was the first to ever say that to him, the first not to see him as a monster, and Elena replied that she understood because monsters were not born but made. A week passed, and the penthouse no longer felt unfamiliar, though Elena still flinched sometimes at the sight of a refrigerator stocked full, or at the ease with which hot water flowed from the shower. Yet she had begun to grow accustomed to waking without fear and looking out the window without searching for Derek's shadow. And Lily adjusted even faster, treating the penthouse like home, treating the guards like uncles, and especially treating Dominic as the most important person after her mother. And on Sunday morning, Elena woke to the sound of laughter from the kitchen, stepped out in her robe, and froze at the sight of Dominic standing at the stove with an apron around his waist, flour smeared across his face while holding a pan, and Lily standing beside him on a tall stool wearing a tiny apron of her own, both covered in flour as though they had waged battle with a bag of it. And when Lily cried out that she had messed up her pancake, Dominic answered patiently, with a gentleness Elena had never heard in his voice, telling her it was fine and that he had ruined 100 before making a good one, urging her to try again. And Elena watched from the doorway as the man all of Boston feared taught her daughter to make pancakes with the tenderness of a father, her heart tightening with a warm, painful emotion, because Lily had never had this, had never had a man patient enough to teach her anything or stand beside her except Elena, yet now she was laughing and learning and receiving a kind of love Elena had never been able to give alone. And when Lily spotted her and shouted that she and Papa Dom were making breakfast for her, Elena looked at Dominic, who was also looking back at her, neither correcting the name, neither pretending it was wrong, and Dominic simply stood there with flour on his cheek and a spatula in his hand, looking nothing like the Mafia boss she knew. And when Lily proudly declared that she herself had chosen the name, because Dominic cared for her like a father, and asked if he minded, Dominic looked down at the little girl, and for the first time, Elena saw his gray eyes soften completely as he said he did not mind at all. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the princess room, Elena went to the balcony needing air and space to organize her swirling emotions, realizing she was beginning to feel something for Dominic and that this frightened her more than Derek ever had. And when light footsteps approached, Dominic sat beside her, offering her a cup of hot tea, saying nothing as they looked out over the glittering city. And Elena whispered that she had never imagined her life would lead her here, sitting on the balcony of a penthouse, drinking tea with a Mafia boss, while her daughter slept in a princess room and called that man Papa. And Dominic replied that life rarely followed any plan, that he knew this better than anyone. And Elena looked at him and felt an urge to share everything she had never said aloud, and she began to talk, telling him what she had never told anyone, speaking of the girl who could not cry at her parents' funeral at 16, the girl who fled into the night at 18, The woman who gave birth alone at 22 in a cheap hospital. The mother who at 28 worked 2 jobs and still could not afford enough milk for her daughter. And Dominic listened without interrupting, without judging, sometimes laying a hand over hers when she cried, sometimes simply waiting while she gathered her breath. And when she finished, she felt empty yet lighter than she had in 12 years, as though she had finally set down a burden she had carried too long. And Dominic asked whether she knew what he saw when he looked at her, his voice low and warm, telling her he saw a woman life had beaten down more times than he could count, yet who had risen every single time, a mother willing to sacrifice everything for her child, a warrior who had no idea how strong she truly was. And he turned to her with gray eyes glowing in the city light, saying she was stronger than she thought, stronger than anyone he had ever met. 3 days after their conversation on the balcony, something between Elena and Dominic shifted in a quiet way that both of them felt but neither dared to name. Their eyes seeking each other more often, the accidental brush of their hands lingering longer, and the distance between them on the sofa each night as they watched movies with Lily slowly disappearing, leaving Elena aware of a feeling blooming inside her, something she once believed had died long ago, and she could not decide whether it made her grateful or afraid. On the 11th night in the penthouse, she awoke to the sound of the elevator doors opening, glanced at the clock and saw it was nearly 2 in the morning, later than Dominic had ever returned. And when she stepped into the living room, she froze at the sight of him sitting on the sofa in a white shirt soaked with blood, one sleeve torn open, his face exhausted in a way she had never witnessed, his attempt to wrap a bandage around his arm with one hand clumsy and failing until she rushed to him, asking what had happened and if he was all right, and his hoarse reply that it was nothing, only a scratch, made her heart pound because the blood on his shirt proved otherwise. And when she insisted he needed a hospital, he refused, saying they would ask questions he could not answer, and that he had already called his private doctor who would arrive in the morning, which horrified her because it meant he intended to sit there bleeding for hours. So she retrieved the first aid kit, sat beside him, gently pulled his hand away to examine the injury, a cut perhaps 10 centimeters long, deep but not life-threatening, the blood already thickening but still needing proper cleaning. And when she asked whether the blood was his or someone else's, he admitted most of it belonged to someone else, and that the wound had come from a knife, and she did not ask further because she did not want to know, choosing instead to concentrate on tending the wound while her fingers trembled not from fear of blood but from the closeness of him, from the scent of sandalwood beneath the metallic smell, from the warmth of his skin beneath her touch. When Dominic asked softly whether she was afraid, of him, of what he had done tonight, even if she did not know the details, she stopped, lifted her gaze to his, and saw in his gray eyes something startlingly vulnerable, as if her answer mattered more than any threat outside these walls, and she told him evenly that she had lived with a man who used his fists on her every day, that she knew what a monster was, and that he was not one, because he was a man who did terrible things to protect the people he loved, and there was a difference. Then she finished bandaging the wound, yet kept holding his arm because she could not bring herself to let go, until he touched her chin and lifted her face to his, their eyes locking, and in the gray depth she saw something new, not the coldness of a Mafia boss or the gentleness of the man who had taught her daughter to make pancakes, but desire and longing, something raw and fierce. And when he whispered her name like a plea, and kissed her with slow, fragile care as though afraid she might break or vanish, she froze for a heartbeat as memories of Derek's violent kisses clawed up from her past. But this was not Derek. This was Dominic, who asked with his eyes before touching her, who would stop if she wished, and she did not wish for him to stop. So she kissed him back with her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, feeling for the first time in 6 years desired rather than possessed, loved rather than claimed. While Elena and Dominic found each other in the middle of the night, another darkness was gathering across the city where Derek Lawson lay on a filthy bed in a cheap room in Dorchester, glaring at the ceiling, his body aching from the injuries the men of Dominic had given him the night he pounded on Elena's door, more than an escort as Dominic had called it, a lesson delivered with broken ribs, a swollen eye sealed shut for 3 days, and bruises covering him as they struck him again and again, while speaking only a single warning that there would be no warning next time. And Derek had asked around afterward, learned the name, Dominic Vale, whispered with fear he had never encountered, the man who controlled half of Boston, the man called the Ghost because no one who saw his true face lived to describe it. And realizing Elena was now in that man's bed made Derek's hatred boil, fueling a vow to reclaim what he believed belonged to him, even if it meant destroying Dominic Vale. He knew he could not do it alone, so he sought an ally with equal or greater power, someone whose name carried the weight of a legend in prison, Viktor Kozlov. the Russian Mafia boss attempting to expand into Boston and warring with Vale's empire for 2 years, a man who operated in the deep shadows where Dominic's surveillance could not penetrate. And when Derek finally stood in the dark cellar beneath a Russian restaurant in the South End after days of navigating Kozlov's men, he faced a 45-year-old man with silver-cropped hair, a face lined by violence, and icy blue eyes that judged him with open contempt as he demanded to know why Derek dared request an audience. And Derek answered that he had information about Dominic Vale that Kozlov wanted, earning a raised brow and permission to speak. And Derek told him everything. About Elena living in Vale's penthouse, about her 6-year-old daughter Lily, about how Vale looked at Elena, how the ruthless kingpin softened in her presence, and Derek declared that Vale's weakness was Elena and Lily, that he would do anything to protect them, anything at all. And Victor considered this, tapping his finger on his chair before smiling a cold, dead smile, and asking what Derek wanted in return, to which Derek replied that he wanted Elena and the child, that when Kozlov destroyed Vale he wanted back what belonged to him, and Victor, after a long look, agreed, promising Derek what he desired but only after Vale was dead. 2 days later, Dominic received word from Marcus, his right hand, who entered the study with grim urgency, informing him that their contacts in Kozlov's territory reported someone feeding information to the Russian, and that the information concerned Elena Mitchell. And Dominic immediately knew it was Derek Lawson, his gray eyes darkening as Marcus added that Kozlov was mobilizing men, their exact plan unknown, and Dominic rose, staring out at the city where Elena and Lily were, somewhere in the penthouse, likely watching a movie or reading before bed, unaware of the storm gathering, unaware that their presence in his life now made them targets, and with a voice hardened to steel, he ordered security doubled, round the clock, no one entering or leaving the building without his permission, and demanded they uncover Kozlov's plan before the man could act. Elena noticed the change in the days that followed, the subtle tightening of the air around the penthouse as security doubled, and unfamiliar faces appeared at every corner of the building. Dominic coming home later, leaving earlier, moving with attention he tried to hide but could not, his gaze drifting more often toward the windows, his phone vibrating nonstop, closed-door meetings in his study stretching deep into the night. And though Elena did not ask because she knew he would not tell her, she felt the truth gathering like a storm at the edge of the horizon. On the 14th night in the penthouse, Dominic returned earlier than usual while Lily slept and Elena read in the living room. And when he entered, she saw a weariness in his face, laced with something heavier, a kind of resolve she did not yet understand, and he sat beside her in silence before taking a thick envelope from his jacket and telling her to open it. And when she did, her breath faltered at the sight of stacks of cash, at least $100,000. 2 new American passports bearing her and Lily's names under different surnames, and 2 plane tickets to Paris for the following morning. When she asked what it was, Dominic told her it was a new life, one waiting for her and Lily in Europe, with enough money to live comfortably for several years, clean, untraceable documents, and a contact prepared to meet her upon arrival. And when she asked why, he explained that she was no longer safe because Derek had aligned himself with his enemy Viktor Kozlov, a Russian mafia boss, who now knew who she and Lily were, and understood how much they meant to him, and would use that to bring him down. Her heart clenched as she asked what he would do, and he replied that he would stay and fight, that this world was his and had been for 20 years, and he knew how to survive it. And when she whispered, "What if he did not survive?" he answered that she and Lily would still be safe, and that was all that mattered. She stared at him, the man who had rescued her from Derek, who had given her and her daughter a home, who had taught Lily to make pancakes and let her call him Papa Dom, the man who had kissed her as though she were something precious, and she asked if he truly believed she would leave him alone to face all of this, if he thought she would run while he fought for her. And when he began to protest, she cut him off and told him she had spent her whole life running, from her Uncle Greg, from Derek, from everything that hurt and terrified her, and she was tired of running and refused to do it anymore. Dominic insisted this was not the moment for stubbornness, that Kozlov was 100 times more dangerous than Derek, and would not stop until one of them was dead, and that if she stayed, she would be drawn into that war. But Elena told him she did not care, that she did not want a safe life in Paris without him, that she wanted to stay by his side no matter what came, and after a long silent look, he whispered that she was insane, and she answered that perhaps she was, but she was the kind of insane he was stuck with. Then she placed the envelope back in his hand and told him to keep it in case they ever needed it, but that if they ran, they would run together, all 3 of them. And Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he feared she would vanish, and in that hold she knew she had chosen correctly. Even if the path ahead led through hell, she would not walk it alone. The attack came at 5 in the morning when Boston still slept under heavy darkness. Elena lying in Dominic's arms, in the first peaceful sleep she had known in years, when the explosion shattered the silence, glass breaking, gunfire erupting like a storm, shouts and pounding footsteps rushing toward the penthouse as she bolted upright with a racing heart. But Dominic moved faster, rolling from the bed with a gun drawn from the nightstand, his eyes turning to ice as he ordered her to take Lily to the safe room, to lock the door and not open it for anyone until she heard his voice. Elena ran, grabbed Lily, who was trembling on her bed, carried her down the hallway while shielding her from the chaos she glimpsed in the living room, where shattered windows spilled cold air into a scene of men in black flooding through the broken terrace doors and exchanging gunfire with Dominic's guards, blood staining the marble, Russian and English curses echoing together. And she clutched Lily tighter, pushed through the dressing room, slid aside the mirrored panel to reveal the steel-lined safe room, pulled her daughter inside, closed the door, and hit the lock as darkness wrapped around them, except for the small red light pulsing from the security panel. Lily sobbed into her chest, asking where Papa Dom was and whether he would be all right, and Elena whispered that he would, that he was strong and would protect them even as uncertainty twisted inside her. Outside, Dominic fought with the ferocity of a cornered predator, Viktor Kozlov's men outnumbering his 3-1, breaking through the lower defenses, Marcus at his back, firing alongside him with the practiced precision of a decade. But still the enemy pressed forward, and a bullet grazed Dominic's shoulder, sending warm blood down his arm. Yet he did not falter because Elena and Lily were hidden behind those steel walls and no one would reach them while he lived. He moved through the penthouse with cold exactness, every shot deliberate, every motion controlled. And though the battle lasted only 15 minutes, it stretched like 15 hours before the final intruder fell, and the penthouse lay in ruins with blood smeared across shattered marble and walls riddled with bullets, Marcus limping but upright as he checked the bodies. Then Marcus called out that one man was hiding in the child's room, and Dominic's heart stopped as he sprinted down the hall, kicked the door open, and found Derek Lawson clutching a gun with shaking hands and wild eyes, screaming for Dominic to stop or he would shoot. But Dominic kept walking, gray eyes frozen and merciless, asking Derek whether he truly believed he could enter his home, threaten his family, and survive. And Derek snarled that Elena was his wife, Lily his child, that Dominic had stolen them from him, but Dominic told him Elena had never belonged to him, that he had been nothing but a monster who terrorized her and turned her life into hell, and now he had barged into this home aligned with Dominic's enemy and intended to kill her and her daughter for revenge. Derek fired, but his hand shook so violently the bullet missed by half a meter, and before he could fire again, Dominic struck, knocking the gun away and slamming him against the wall, telling him he should kill him because it would be cleaner and easier. But he would not, because death was too gentle for a man like him, that he would rot in prison and live each day in fear the way he had made Elena live, knowing she and Lily were safe and loved and thriving far beyond anything he could have given them. Then Dominic released him and let him fall to the floor before ordering Marcus to call the police and hand Derek over for armed intrusion, assault, and organized crime involvement, charges that would ensure he did not see the outside world for at least 15 years. And he instructed Marcus to use their last remaining favor with the commissioner to classify the chaos as a home invasion, self-defense, ensuring no handcuffs would touch them tonight. And Marcus nodded, accepting the burden of cleaning up the empire so his king could finally leave. When the door of the safe room opened and Elena saw Dominic standing there alive and breathing, she could no longer hold herself together, and she ran into his arms, sobbing while Lily clung tightly to both of them. The three of them standing in the middle of the ruined penthouse, surrounded by blood and shattered glass, yet still alive, still together. And that was all that truly mattered. And when Elena told him he was hurt and needed a hospital, Dominic brushed it off as a scratch, but held her even tighter as if terrified she might disappear, asking if she and Lily were unharmed, and Elena stepped back to look directly into his eyes and told him the envelope he had given her days before, with the money and the new passports and the plane tickets still existed. And when he tried to answer, she stopped him and said she would use them but not alone, that she wanted him to come with them, all three of them, to leave Boston and leave this world behind and begin again in a place without enemies or violence or blood. And Dominic looked at her with gray eyes full of emotions she had learned to read over the past weeks, surprise and hesitation and yearning and finally hope. And he whispered that he did not know how to be a normal man because he had lived in this world for too long and did not know if he could change. And she told him they would learn together, because she also did not know how to trust without fear, or how to love without flinching. But he had shown her it was possible, and now she would show him it was possible to live without violence, And Lily looked up at Dominic with wide, tearful eyes and asked if Papa Dom would go with her and Mama because she did not want him to stay behind alone. And with those simple words from a 6-year-old child, every wall Dominic had built over 20 years collapsed as he knelt down and held Lily in his arms and nodded and promised that he would go. And 3 years later, on the coast of Maine, a small white house stood across from a bakery called Elena's Kitchen, where each morning the scent of warm bread and fresh coffee drifted out the open door and welcomed the peaceful residents of the quiet little town. And Elena stood behind the counter with an apron tied around her waist, stretched slightly over her 5-month pregnant belly as she smiled while serving familiar customers, while Dominic worked in the kitchen, kneading dough and baking bread with recipes he had learned from the books Rosa had sent them. His hands that once held guns and took lives now knowing only flour and rising yeast. And sometimes when he thought about the past, he still could not believe he had made it here. And Lily burst through the back door calling Dad, Dad, and ran into the kitchen glowing with pride as she announced she had earned the highest score in her class for art and that her teacher said she had talent. And Dominic set aside his work and knelt to gather her into his arms with a warm smile, asking where she wanted her painting hung, in the shop or at home. And Lily laughed and said both so everyone could see it. And Elena watched them from the doorway with her hand resting on the place where their second child grew, remembering the old apartment and the constant fear and the nights of silent tears. And now she stood in her own bakery watching her husband and daughter laugh together, while carrying the child of a love that had finally been given space to bloom. And she knew life had given her far more pain than she ever deserved, but in the end, it had given her happiness as well. And that night after Lily fell asleep and the small house settled into stillness, Elena and Dominic sat on the porch looking out at the sea, while the waves murmured against the shore and the moonlight shimmered across the water, and the air carried the clean scent of salt. And when Elena asked if he regretted leaving everything behind in Boston, Dominic remained silent for a moment before shaking his head and saying he only regretted not doing it sooner, that he had wasted 20 years building an empire he never needed, while everything he truly needed, family and love and peace, had been waiting for him all along. And he turned to her with gray eyes, warm and filled with devotion, and thanked her for giving him a second chance and not giving up on him. And she kissed him softly and thanked him for saving her and Lily and for becoming the man they needed. And together they understood that the greatest protection was not guns or money or power but love, the kind that stands beside you through every storm, that gives you a home to return to at the end of each long day, that keeps a heart beating for you even when the world turns cold. And this was the story of Elena and Dominic, 2 souls nearly broken by life, yet who found each other in the dark, a reminder that it is never too late to begin again, never too late to trust once more, and that true love can rise from the most unexpected places. And if this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily emotional stories. Leave a like and share this video with those you care about, and tell us how Elena and Dominic's journey made you feel. Whether you have ever faced moments of despair only to find light again, and share your story in the comments below because we always want to hear what lives deep within your hearts. And we wish every one of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and a peaceful heart each day. Thank you for accompanying us, and goodbye until the next video.